cancer. And the doctor was required a complete blood transfusion. And so part of the process was that he was going to have to live in isolation for 6 to 8 weeks while he recovered from the transfusion and from the chemo, because he couldn't be exposed to any kind of pathogens. His mom, who was one of my employees, arranged to take all the time off because he was going to have to live by himself. He wasn't going to be able to physically do a lot, and so he would need somebody to help care for him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I remember thinking at the time, that's a real definition of what love is. To willingly sacrifice everything you are, everything you have, to care for someone else is truly the definition of what love is. You know, we laughingly talk about loving like Jesus, when I'm afraid so many of us don't really understand what true love is. We started a new series a week ago, Loving Like Jesus, and we talked about how Jesus forgives our sins. And tonight, I'm going to be talking about foot washing. Now, I'm not instituting we're not going to do any feet washing here in church. But I want to talk about servanthood. And I want to talk about being the servant that God called you to be. You know, we think that service is beneath us sometimes. We think, oh, that's too hard, that's too difficult, I don't work that way. I'll serve, but I want to serve by leading a Bible study or by, being a leader or being a boss. And yet, I've been around long enough to realize that in many, many churches, the true servants are the ones who step up and do things, and they're not looking for applause. They're not looking for recognition. They're just there because they love and they want to care for others. I remember reading a story about a gentleman who got very, very ill, and so he went to see the doctor with his wife, and after they got through talking, the doctor pulled the wife aside and said, he's very, very ill, but he can be cured. In fact, if you keep his environment clean, and it means you need to be available to him nonstop, it'll take more than you could ever imagine. You need to cook for him and clean for him and be there to serve him and do this over the next 8 weeks. Your husband will recover. She walked out, and the husband, obviously nervous, and said, well, what did the doctor say? And she looked at her husband. The doctor says, it was really news. You're going to die, and you're going to die, and there's nothing we can do about it. But I tell that as a funny story a lot of times, but the bottom line is, I think we tend to treat each other that way. I want to help, I want to say I'm a servant, but I just don't have time. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to stress myself out over that. You know what? I'm not doing that. I'm not going to help. I'm going to be transparent. I hope you don't hate me for it. But sometimes I have an attitude about it. It's like, I'm not doing that. I'm too cool for that. I'm not going there. Help me out with that. Will you a lot of you, I'm not doing that. Well, forget about any of that, because right now, in the message series we're looking at, the love of Jesus, that he constantly sought people with irrational acts of love. And that love was in service. Last week we saw how Jesus forgave sinners. And I was very thankful and personally touched because I realized what Jesus did for me. And I really hope that you heard the message last week and you translated it into going out and forgiving and being very thankful for those who forgave you. And next week, we're going to talk about Jesus breaking bread. But I want to look at an image of Jesus washing feet and the picture of him serving those around him. So we're going to be in the Gospel of John, chapter 13, and we'll start in verse 1 and 2, and let this set the context for the image of loving like Jesus. How do we do it? Well, one of the ways we do that is we serve others, and I want you to see this picture of Jesus serving. John 13:1 says this, "It was just before the Passover festival, and Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father." Jesus had been living up all this one point that he would actually give his life. This is the day before crucifixion, and you can imagine the emotion he's feeling. The text goes on to say, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. Jesus loved them till the end, and we're going to love like Jesus. And if we're going to do that, we need to learn to serve like Jesus. In verse 2 it says, the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. So Jesus is about to give his life. And you look at his week and imagine how incredibly difficult the week had been. On Monday, he cleansed the temple. He went in and turned over the tables and said, "You will not turn my Father's house into a place of profit. This will be a house of worship." And on Tuesday, he was in a massive fight with the religious leaders. And Wednesday, and now it's Thursday night, and he's gathered in a secret room with his closest friends, his 11 disciples, and his betrayer, ready to give his final speech, to share with them the body and the blood, the bread and the wine, in this historic, heartfelt moment. And he knows one of his disciples is getting ready to betray him, and the other 11 were going to abandon him. He knows that the next day he's going to be beaten and betrayed and tortured. He's going to be hung on a cross to die. And according to Luke's gospel, a fight breaks out amongst the disciples. He's having dinner, and the disciples were acting like 2-year-olds. One of them says, "I wonder who's going to be the greatest." And the other one says, "Well, probably me." And all of a sudden there's a dispute. Who's the best? Who ranks the highest? Who's the favorite? Who's the best of the best? We don't know exactly what happened. But I can imagine John going, "Well, I'm the one he loved, and I'm the greatest because I'm the one he loved." And Peter probably says, "Well, I walked on water with him, and all you other guys just stayed in the boat." And another one probably said, "Well, Peter, yeah, you sank." Then Bartholomew maybe sneaks up, "What about me? Everybody says nobody will remember you one day because he isn't even one of the 2 disciples. No one will even know your name." There's this dispute going on. Who's the greatest? And you can imagine Jesus thinking to himself, "I already told you." If you remember, this was in Matthew's gospel, and he said, "The greatest is the one who will be your servant." Jesus had told him that. "I did not come to be served by others, but I came to serve you, to lay down my life as a ransom for many." He looks around the room at his final meal with his closest friends, and what does he do? You see proud hearts and dirty feet. And he thinks to himself, "I can wash their feet. This one is mine." Watch what Jesus does. Verse 4, "So Jesus got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him." Now, for us, in our culture, in our time, that's a weird thing to do. So Jesus gets up, fills a basin, wraps a towel around his waist, and starts going from person to person, washing their feet. Now, I jokingly tell people that Jesus would have never washed my feet because I've got the world's ugliest feet, and they would probably scare people off. I know better. It's a joke. But here's reality. You see, in Jewish homes, at Jewish festivals, hospitality was extremely important. It was a very, very important thing. And for that very reason, Jewish households employed a servant who was supposed to wash the feet of all guests. Now, this servant couldn't be Jewish. He was the lowest servant in the house, and he had to be a Gentile. Jews didn't do this. It was considered beneath them. It was the lowest job in the household. And so Jesus gets out to serve his disciples in the most humble way you can imagine. And so here he is, he's washing their feet. The host would never ever wash the feet of the guest because that was too much of a humiliating task. Essentially, the guest was saying, I'm going to show you how important I am because I got someone here who can wash your feet. Feet are kind of disgusting. Imagine if somebody came to your house and volunteered to wash your feet. Jesus is at the final meal. The night before he's going to give his life, he looks around him and he washes their feet. He goes up, puts on a slave's apron, picks up a bucket and fills it with water, and then he does this. They're like, no, wait a minute, whoa. Give you a scenario, and this isn't even close, but let me give you an idea of just how shocking this would be. So, you're at the house one day. Somebody knocks on the door. You go and open the door, and it's Secret Service agents. And there is the President of the United States. And he comes in the house. You say hello to him. And he looks at you and says, I'm here to serve you. Where's your cleaning supplies? I'm going to clean your toilets. Okay? I mean, that's close to what Jesus is doing. But it helps put you in your head. That's how humbling it was. Jesus says, I love you so much that I'm going to serve you by doing this. I'm going to debase myself. I'm going to degrade myself. I'm going to get into the lowest job the lowest slave does to wash your feet. We're talking about Jesus. We're not talking about a human being. We're talking about the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, the living water, the bread of life, the Creator and the Redeemer. He's our righteousness. He's the light of the world. He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And he stoops down and starts washing the feet of the disciples, the least of the low in that society, because he sees a need. The feet are dirty, and I can do that. Jesus loved them to the end, doing something that everyone thought ever was too low to be done. The greatest is the one who will be your servant. The Son of God knelt down and washed feet. And we say, oh no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to humble myself to serve someone. I'm too busy for that. That's beneath me. That's something I'm trying to train myself to do. And that is whenever I see a need that I can meet, I try to ask myself, God, is this an assignment that you have for me to do? I dare you this week to ask yourself just that question. God, give me eyes to see needs that I would otherwise overlook. Give me ears to hear those who are hurting. Give me a heart to care. God, if there's a need that I can meet, cause me to pause and to stop and say, God, is that an assignment from you for me to meet? See, I think we miss a lot of opportunities to serve because we're too focused on ourselves. In the church that I served as associate pastor in for years, we have a hospital in our area, and we have a real issue with HIV. A lot of children born with HIV positive or crack babies. It's a tough and sad thing. And the thing that most people don't realize is those babies, they need to be loved on too. And so many of them are ignored because people are too busy or it's too much beneath them to just go and to rock a baby in a crib or to hug him or to hold them. And so we're too busy for that. When God says we're supposed to be showing our love, that's how we identify who a Christian is their love for. And you show your love by serving. The reality is that I have missed too many times where God has said, I want you to go over there and serve that person. And so right now the thing that I am working on is to say, God, open my eyes. Don't help me see, help me to realize I'm not too important. I am simply saved by your grace. And that person is hurting, and that person may need my care. And maybe it's beyond my ability. Because I think part of our issue, when we don't serve, it's not because we're too busy, it's because we're too proud. We look around and say, oh, no, it's beneath me. I'm too important to serve. I'm too important to care. To take care of those who are hurting and in need. So I think God gives me opportunities. And so I'm begging God to give me open eyes to see when the needs are there that I can meet, that I can serve others, no matter how trivial it might seem. Lord and Savior chose to wash the feet of his disciples. He washed the disciples' feet. And guys, it doesn't say he didn't he washed all of their feet. I want you to realize what that implies. He washed Peter's feet, washed James and John. He washed Judas's feet. He served the one who would betray him. You never stopped to realize that, did you? You never stopped to think about that Jesus is here washing their feet, breaks bread with them, but he's already washed their feet by this time. All his disciples get their feet washed by the Lord. Because he said, I've come to be a servant. Come to seek and to save the lost. Jesus looks at him and says, here am I. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to show you I love you by serving you. Just like he does for us. A friend of mine talks about when he was younger, he was dealing with it, and he went to the home improvement store, and he was there with this little old lady. He started talking to her, and she was like, she's maybe in her 70s, and she was trying to reach up and grab the biggest hedge clippers that he'd ever seen. And he sat there and watched her for a few minutes, and so he walked over, and he said, "Ma'am, can I help you?" And she's like, "Oh, please, thank you. I, I keep get these things down, and would you like them in your basket?" And she's like, "Yeah." And so he put them in her basket, and then she's looking at these other big hedge trimmers and said, "What are you trying to accomplish?" And she told him, "Well, my bush is high, and I just can't see out the window, and my yard needs work." And so I asked her, he said, "Do you have family in town or anybody that can help you?" And she was like, "Well, most of them are out of town and they're really, really busy, and if you could just help me get this to my cart, that'll be enough." And I did that, he said, and I put it in the cart, and I'm walking away thinking, "Oh, I served." And then he said, "I thought, no, God's called me to serve her. And even though I'm busy, even though I've got all the stuff I need to do on my own yard, and I don't really want to do that because I hate yard work." He said the more he tried to walk away, there was something just kept pulling him back. And finally, he walked up to her and said, he came up to her and he said, "Ma'am, would you let me mow your grass and do your weeds and do your limbs for you?" She said she broke down and started crying. But he went home with her, trimmed her trees, mowed her grass, did some repairs around the house. And got to talk to her after that. And the week after that, she came to the church he was at. And she spent the next 15 years going to that church and talking about Jesus and how much Jesus loved her. All because he chose to obey God's voice to serve. So let me challenge you. You are called to serve. I don't know where God is leading you. And I'm not saying that you serve by being the Sunday school teacher. Sometimes your service at Grace Baptist might be nothing more than coming and spending some hours when you're online and there's nothing else going, and just sit out front, people that walk past. Say hello to people. Help them find things at the church if they need it. It's not just about your actions, folks. It's about your attitude. And you can do just about anything that God calls you to do it. I was created and gifted by God, and I get to show the love of Jesus today. So, Lord, help us to see what you have in mind. When you have the right attitude, the right actions follow, even if you don't initially feel it. Serving's not what I do. A servant I am. Don't miss that. Serving is not what you do. A servant is who you are. Pastor Craig from Lodge tells this story, and I'm just going to read this story. Said 17 years ago, while his wife was pregnant with their daughter, they were she bumped into a car that she thought was turning. Started to turn, and then it stopped, and she bumped them. Good news is, little bump. She went out and looked. The driver got out and looked, and Amy saw nothing on their car, and there was nothing on his car. And he wanted to call the police. She said, "Well, nothing there," but he called the police anyway. And they said, "There's nothing there. We're not going to give a ticket. You go and you go." And she gave him our information, and he called and said there's several $100s worth of damage to his car from the accident. The police said